August 12, 1794, on the outskirts of Augusta, Georgia, on the sweltering fields of Augusta, Agnes didn't beg for justice. She fought to end the torment that had stolen her family, her friends, and her dignity. Her hands didn't just strike the overseer's flesh, they shattered the chains of tyranny. One by one, 4 slave masters who had tortured and humiliated her people met the earth beneath her wrath, their screams swallowed by the soil. And where blood once soaked the cotton rows, she planted schools, voices, and defiance. Agnes became a storm in a world that tried to silence her, and to this day, the wind whispers through Augusta, carrying the echoes of a freedom no whip could break. This is where the story gets truly chilling. Welcome to Echoes of Truth, the gathering place for those brave enough to uncover history's darkest secrets. Can you handle what you're about to hear? Because Agnes's story is not for the faint of heart. Comment your location below, subscribe, and join this investigation, because tonight we peel back the veil on a tale of injustice, vengeance, and the raw, unflinching pursuit of freedom. I want you to picture this. Augusta in 1794 was a city of stark contradictions, a place where grandeur and suffering coexisted in uneasy proximity. Streets dusted with the red clay of the South radiated heat that clung to your skin like a second layer, carrying with it the mingled scents of smoke from cooking fires, sweat from laboring bodies, and a faint tang of salt drifting upriver from the savannah. Majestic mansions with polished porches and gleaming windows rose arrogantly beside rickety shanties where slaves huddled in cramped quarters, and the disparity between them was as visible as the midday sun. The air itself carried the tension of authority enforced with brutality, the crack of overseers' whips snapping through the humid atmosphere, the muffled cries of those punished for the slightest misstep, and the relentless rhythm of toil that seemed to stretch from dawn until darkness fell. Behind every polite facade, Augusta hid a darker world, one of whispered fears, secret alliances, and quiet resistance. Merchants and officials passed with smiles that masked opportunism, while families bore invisible scars from years of systemic oppression. Freedom was not granted here. It was a word spoken only in whispers, passed between those brave enough to dream in secret. And survival? Survival demanded far more than obedience. It required cunning, courage, and at times, a willingness to embrace acts that most would call unthinkable. It demanded a mind sharp enough to notice every subtle change, every hidden crack in the overseer's armor, and a heart unflinching enough to act when opportunity finally arrived. Augusta was a city alive with contradictions, and it was in this crucible of injustice and resilience that Agnes's story would take root, growing from whispered rumors into a reckoning that would shake the very foundations of the plantation system. Now you have to understand, the men Agnes confronted were no ordinary tyrants. On the surface, they were pillars of Augusta society, respected merchants, landowners, and overseers whose reputations gleamed in the eyes of the city's elite. Their polished smiles and impeccable manners commanded attention, and their presence alone inspired obedience in those who worked their lands. But behind closed doors, a far darker reality thrived. Agnes had witnessed the cruel precision with which they maintained control. Floggings administered with almost ritualistic regularity, whispered threats in the dead of night, punishments designed not merely to inflict pain, but to crush the human spirit entirely. Each man carried his own methods of terror, and each was an architect of suffering, shaping the lives of slaves with the calculated coldness of someone who had long abandoned empathy. They moved through Augusta with the confidence of men untouchable, laughing at social gatherings while silently dictating who would live in fear and who would endure unimaginable torment. Yet Agnes understood their patterns, their weaknesses, and the fragile arrogance that hid their vulnerability. She knew the secrets they believed buried, the ledger of punishments, the hidden rooms where victims cried silently, the complicity of those who enabled their cruelty. Every detail, every habit, every small act of cruelty became a thread she could unravel. And when the time came, she would strike not in blind fury, but with the precision of someone who had studied the anatomy of oppression itself. These men were human in appearance, but their souls had been warped by power, greed, and cruelty, and Agnes had already begun to chart the path to their reckoning. Let's be real. Publicly, Augusta saw only what the overseers allowed them to see. The city's elite praised their apparent fairness, lauded their piety, and marveled at the order that seemed to flow effortlessly from their hands. Reports described well-fed workers, neatly tended fields, and a plantation that appeared almost idyllic to the casual observer. Any visitor passing through would have believed they were witnessing benevolence in action, a harmonious ecosystem of labor and oversight where obedience was rewarded and disorder was swiftly corrected. Yet Agnes knew better. Behind the manicured facades, every aspect of daily life was a tightly controlled performance, a cover story designed to mask cruelty and conceal the systematic oppression endured by those who labored under them. The kindness offered in public was a carefully calibrated illusion, a layer of deception meant to disarm outsiders and prevent scrutiny. Even minor acts of resistance were punished in secrecy, buried beneath false explanations that maintained the illusion of civility. And it was in these shadows, within the cracks of the overseer's polished image, that Agnes honed her understanding of their true nature. Every public smile, every ceremonial bow, every whispered compliment to visiting dignitaries was another piece of the mask she would one day tear away. The elegance and respectability projected outward were a farce, concealing not just individual cruelty, but an entire system engineered to manipulate perception and control lives. Agnes saw through it all, and she was preparing to exploit every flaw in their carefully constructed narrative, turning their own cover story against them, proving that no deception, however convincing, could withstand the reckoning she was about to unleash. I want you to picture this. The system that kept Augusta's plantations under control was as intricate as it was terrifying. It was not simply the overseers or their whips that maintained dominance. It was the entire infrastructure of oppression, meticulously designed to suppress, surveil, and manipulate. Hidden paddocks and locked barns concealed punishments from prying eyes, while guards moved in rotating shifts to prevent any patterns from being discovered. Secret rooms housed implements of torment, from chains that bit into flesh to tools designed to break both body and spirit. The layout of the plantations, the positioning of sentries, even the timing of the overseers' rounds was calculated to ensure that fear remained a constant, invisible companion. Slaves were watched relentlessly, their movements monitored, their slightest mistakes noted and exploited. And yet, within these systems lay vulnerabilities, blind spots, overlooked corridors, moments when routine faltered. Agnes studied each of these weaknesses with the patience and precision of a master strategist. Every tool, every rotation schedule, every hidden door became a piece of a larger puzzle she intended to dismantle. She memorized the rhythms of the guards, the rotation of keys and locks, the timing of meals and inspections, all while maintaining the guise of submission that would protect her until the moment was right. This infrastructure, built to enforce submission, was also a roadmap to liberation for those bold enough to study it, cunning enough to exploit it, and fearless enough to act. Agnes understood this. She knew the machinery of oppression inside and out, and she had already begun planning how to turn it against those who believed themselves untouchable. Now you have to understand, whenever outsiders noticed strange occurrences on the plantation, there was always a tidy, plausible explanation ready at hand. Missing tools, sudden injuries, whispered rumors of strange noises in the dead of night. Each anomaly had an official story to maintain the illusion of order. Disease was blamed for sudden deaths, accidents for injuries, and misbehavior for any disruptions in labor. Visitors and officials alike were reassured that everything was under control, that the plantation ran efficiently, and that nothing untoward had occurred under the watchful eyes of reputable overseers. Even the families of slaves were fed explanations that masked reality: a fever here, a fall there, a punishment that was mild and justified. The authorities were complicit, either by willful ignorance or deliberate deception, in creating this veneer of normalcy. And yet, beneath these official accounts, the truth festered, unacknowledged but unmistakable to anyone brave. or desperate enough to look closely. Agnes saw through every lie, every carefully crafted story, every excuse designed to maintain the status quo. She knew that these explanations were not mistakes. They were shields for cruelty, mechanisms to prevent justice, and a way to keep the machinery of oppression running smoothly. Each alibi and cover-up revealed a pattern, a weakness, a thread that could be pulled to unravel the entire system. To the world, the plantation appeared orderly and serene. To Agnes, it was a labyrinth of injustice, a stage upon which she would choreograph a reckoning that the official explanations could never anticipate. The lies were thick, but they were brittle, and she intended to shatter them piece by piece. This is where the story gets truly chilling. No tyrant maintains power entirely alone, and Augusta was no exception. Every overseer had someone working in the shadows, a collaborator who facilitated cruelty and hid the truth from the world. It might have been a house servant, outwardly loyal, who carried whispered secrets from one room to the next, feeding information to the oppressors, or a guard who turned a blind eye to abuse, pretending not to notice the torment unfolding just beyond the fields. Even local officials, clerics, merchants, and minor magistrates, sometimes offered subtle approval, ensuring that the system remained unquestioned and uninterrupted. These collaborators were the silent gears in a machine built to control lives, and without them, the tyranny could not have endured. Agnes recognized them instantly. She studied their patterns, their loyalties, and the small betrayals that made them human. Every facilitator left a mark, a footprint, a vulnerability that could be exploited. To outsiders, these enablers were invisible, hidden in plain sight, but to Agnes, they were crucial pieces of her plan. She knew that turning the system against itself required more than confronting the overseers directly. It required understanding and manipulating the network of complicity that made cruelty possible. Each collaborator, knowingly or unknowingly, became part of the web she intended to unravel. And in this realization lay both danger and opportunity. The wrong step could expose her prematurely, but the right move could collapse the entire structure of control from within. Agnes walked this line carefully, learning to exploit trust and fear alike, transforming the complicity of others into tools for the reckoning she had already begun to orchestrate. I want you to picture this. The victims of Augusta's plantations were far more than statistics or nameless faces. They were human beings, each carrying dreams, fears, and stories cut tragically short by a system designed to dehumanize. Children, barely old enough to walk, were sent into the fields before they could even comprehend freedom, their small hands blistered by relentless labor. Women, stripped of choice and dignity, were forced into a ceaseless cycle of toil that left their bodies exhausted and their spirits battered. Men, once strong and proud, were systematically broken, their strength used to feed the very industry that sought to crush them. Agnes observed these lives closely, understanding the unique vulnerabilities each person carried and storing the details in her mind for the day she would strike. She noted their routines, the moments when hope flickered in their eyes, and the subtle ways they communicated fear, endurance, and solidarity. Each injustice she witnessed was etched into her memory, fueling a righteous anger that would guide her hands when the time came for reckoning. To Agnes, these victims were not passive bystanders. They were living testaments to the cruelty she had endured alongside them, mirrors reflecting the horrors inflicted daily. Their suffering was a map of the overseer's depravity, a series of patterns waiting to be exploited. She understood that vengeance without awareness could falter, but knowledge, combined with courage, could transform despair into retribution. The lives of the oppressed were both a warning and a weapon in Agnes's mind, and she carried their stories silently, letting their pain sharpen her resolve and prepare her to dismantle the empire of fear that had dominated Augusta for generations. Now you have to understand, not every eye could remain blind to Agnes's growing plan. There was a young farmhand, barely 15, who stumbled upon her one humid night as she moved silently through the plantation, mapping paths, inspecting locks, and studying the routines of the overseers. His first instinct was shock. fear tightening his chest, eyes wide at the sight of a single woman maneuvering with precision, knowledge, and a quiet, terrifying authority. Yet as he watched her work, he began to grasp the method behind her actions, the meticulous care she took in preparing for what most would call impossible. Every ledger she consulted, every whispered note she made, every silent step she traced through the shadows revealed a mind honed for vengeance and a courage beyond his years. The farmhand realized immediately that what he was witnessing was not impulsive rage. It was calculated justice, executed with a clarity and purpose that few could comprehend. But knowledge, as he would soon learn, carried immense danger. By observing Agnes, he became entangled in a web far darker than he had ever known, and any slip of curiosity could mark him for scrutiny, or worse, silence. He understood that survival required discretion, and that even the smallest acknowledgement of what he had seen could compromise her or him. In the flickering light of the moon, he became both witness and participant, a keeper of secrets he could scarcely articulate. And as Agnes moved on, unaware of the young observer, the farmhand carried the weight of her impending rebellion in his mind, knowing that the story he had glimpsed in shadows would soon burst into violent, undeniable reality. Now, you have to understand. The young farmhand, who had glimpsed Agnes at work, became a prisoner of his own mind. Every night, the plantation seemed to breathe with memory, the creak of boards underfoot, the distant crack of a whip, the whispered cries that floated through the humid air. Sleep became impossible. Nightmares of blood, shadow, and silent screams haunted him relentlessly. He wanted to tell someone, to unburden himself, but who would believe a child reporting the meticulous vengeance of a single enslaved woman against 4 feared overseers? The adults around him, conditioned by fear and complacency, dismissed anything that threatened their fragile understanding of control. Denial was a shield for everyone, a convenient cover to avoid acknowledging the full extent of cruelty. And for the farmhand, silence was not optional, it was survival. He learned quickly that observing the truth came with a price, and the cost was high. Even as he carried the weight of knowledge, he felt powerless, trapped between loyalty, fear, and the knowledge that a single misstep could expose him to the horrors he now understood. Yet within this tension, the seeds of recognition grew. He realized that Agnes's actions were inevitable, and that the system that demanded silence would ultimately meet its reckoning. In those suffocating nights, filled with dread and the scent of the red clay fields, he began to see the outlines of her strategy, understanding that history itself was about to pivot on her courage, precision, and fury. Let's be real. When whispers of Agnes's actions began to circulate, the authorities moved with careful calculation, not to uncover the truth, but to preserve the illusion of order. Investigations were staged, interviews scripted, and timelines manipulated to make chaos appear accidental. Any evidence that might point to deliberate action was quietly buried, conveniently misplaced, or reinterpreted to absolve the powerful. Reports painted Agnes as insane, a dangerous anomaly whose acts could be dismissed as the tantrums of a woman pushed beyond reason. Every inquiry was a performance designed to reassure the public, to preserve the legitimacy of a system built on exploitation. Yet beneath the surface, those who observed closely, like the farmhand, could see the cracks in the facade, the subtle tension in the interrogator's eyes, the nervous avoidance of inconvenient details. The official explanation never aligned with what the victims endured or what Agnes planned. Instead, it reinforced the notion that power could manipulate perception and that justice, for those beneath it, was as fleeting as the wind across the cotton rows. The authorities had perfected plausible deniability, and yet, Agnes's careful, calculated rebellion threatened to expose every flaw. She understood that the system relied on deception, and she had already begun exploiting the distance between appearance and reality, ensuring that no staged inquiry, no false report could stop the inevitable reckoning that would follow. I want you to picture this. Those who survived the overseer's cruelty carried it in every fiber of their being. Men moved with hunched shoulders and wary eyes, their confidence stripped away by years of systematic degradation. Women bore invisible scars, hands calloused, bodies exhausted, hearts wary of kindness that might conceal betrayal. Children who had laughed freely now whispered their joy, their innocence stolen by daily brutality. Every tremor, every glance, every hushed murmur of fear became testimony, a living record of injustice. Agnes observed these survivors with precision, understanding that their pain mapped the architecture of oppression. Their altered bodies and behaviors were evidence more potent than any ledger, more revealing than any witness testimony. She carried their suffering silently, translating it into strategy, letting the weight of their collective trauma guide her actions. Each survivor was a mirror, reflecting not only what had been taken from them, but also what could be reclaimed. Their endurance demonstrated resilience, but also exposed the cracks in the overseer's control. In studying them, Agnes learned not only about the cruelty she sought to punish, but also about the vulnerabilities she could exploit. The altered victims, living proofs of abuse, became silent allies in her mission. Their suffering charted the path of vengeance, illuminating the weaknesses of those who had wielded fear as a weapon. Through them, she understood that justice would not be accidental. It would be deliberate, precise, and unavoidable. Now you have to understand. Agnes's acts of vengeance were not impulsive or driven by emotion alone. They were executed with calculated, almost scientific precision. She observed every patrol, every guard rotation, every overseer's habit, committing patterns to memory with the careful attention of a master strategist. The plantation itself became a laboratory, each corridor, barn, and field a component of an intricate experiment in rebellion. Every step was measured, every movement deliberate, ensuring that her strikes would be both effective and minimally detectable until the final moment. She cataloged weaknesses in security, noted inconsistencies in the guards' routines, and tracked moments when power faltered. Even the timing of meals, of chores, of nightly inspections was analyzed for optimal opportunity. Her vengeance was a choreography of justice, a system designed to dismantle oppression piece by piece. What others might see as brutality was in fact method, every act weighed against outcomes, every action part of a broader calculation. Agnes transformed the cruelty inflicted upon herself and others into data, and from that data, she engineered a response that was precise, unavoidable, and devastatingly effective. The combination of observation, planning, and execution elevated her rebellion from simple retaliation to an exacting instrument of retribution, demonstrating that even under the harshest oppression, strategy, intelligence, and courage could overturn the most entrenched power structures. In this scientific approach, Agnes ensured that justice would not only come, but that it would leave a lasting mark, impossible to erase. I want you to picture this. Agnes of Augusta was not merely a survivor. She was a storm cloaked in flesh and bone, flawed, scarred, and relentless. She carried within her the anguish of generations whose lives had been stolen, whose voices had been silenced. Every lash, every insult, every act of dehumanization had been etched into her memory, fueling a determination that few could comprehend. She moved with the grace of someone who had learned to blend into shadows, observing, listening, calculating, and waiting. Yet beneath this careful exterior lay an unflinching fire. Agnes's courage was born not only from survival, but from an unshakable sense of justice. A deep knowledge that tyranny must be answered with action. She was clever enough to navigate the intricate social hierarchies of Augusta, brave enough to confront the most feared men on the plantation, and ruthless enough to ensure that the reckoning would be absolute. Her humanity was palpable. Her fears, doubts, and moments of exhaustion were real, but so was her will. She understood that a single misstep could cost her life. Yet she moved forward anyway, guided by intellect, experience, and an almost prophetic sense of timing. Agnes was history's storm made human, a force that would not be denied, whose vengeance would leave indelible marks on the very foundation of the system that had oppressed her. In her presence, every injustice trembled, every lie quivered, and every tyrant's confidence wavered. She was not just planning rebellion. She was becoming the embodiment of justice itself, precise, calculated, and unstoppable. Now, you have to understand, Agnes did not act recklessly or without preparation. She infiltrated the plantation's routines like a shadow, learning the patterns of guards, the habits of overseers, and the vulnerabilities of the complicit collaborators who facilitated cruelty behind the scenes. Every meal schedule, every patrol route, every hidden ledger was catalogued in her mind with meticulous attention to detail. She observed the minutiae of plantation life. When the wind carried sounds across the cotton fields, how the overseer's footsteps echoed in different halls, which servants could be trusted and which would betray her. And from these observations, she built a mental map of opportunity. Her rebellion was not random, it was engineered. She moved invisibly among the enslaved, listening to whispered accounts of abuse, understanding the deepest fears and hopes of those around her. Agnes's actions were guided by intelligence, patience, and an almost surgical precision that transformed her into both detective and strategist. Every secret she uncovered, every hidden routine she memorized, became a potential tool, a lever she could pull to dismantle the overseer's empire of terror. Her method was quiet, but relentless, her observation both protective and offensive. She blended into shadows, yet every action she took edged her closer to confrontation. To anyone who underestimated her, she would appear insignificant, almost invisible. But in truth, Agnes's investigation had already placed her in the perfect position to strike with precision that would be as swift as it was devastating. This is where the story gets truly chilling. Can you handle what comes next? Because Agnes's plan was about to reach its critical point, where preparation met action and strategy collided with reality. If you think you're ready to witness courage born from suffering, stay with me. Comment, subscribe, and brace yourself, because what follows is a journey few could survive emotionally, and even fewer could comprehend fully. Imagine standing in the shadows of those humid cotton fields, the night thick with the scent of earth and sweat, listening as footsteps approach. Some heavy with authority, others light with curiosity, and knowing that a single misstep could change everything. You would see the intensity in Agnes's eyes, the patience in her movements, the calculation behind each choice. This is not a tale of impulsive rage. It is a narrative of precision, intelligence, and inevitability. Every action she takes is deliberate, designed to unravel decades of cruelty. The tension is almost unbearable. And yet, it is necessary, because it mirrors the precarious balance of power in Augusta. The stakes are enormous, the danger palpable, and the reckoning inevitable. The suspense is not just historical, it is immediate, it is personal, and it is unfolding right before your eyes. Can you follow her? Can you feel the weight of anticipation pressing on every decision, every calculated step, every breath held in the humid night air? If so, you are ready to witness the moment where observation transforms into action, where the oppressed rise, and where justice, however brutal, begins its long, unyielding march. I want you to picture this. Agnes uncovered proof of cruelty that was impossible to ignore, hidden in plain sight, yet invisible to anyone untrained in observation. Ledgers meticulously catalogued punishments, detailing each act of cruelty, each beat, each lash that had broken bodies and spirits alike. Hidden rooms contained tools designed for torment, carefully preserved as if to mock the suffering they inflicted. Whispered confessions of collaborators, secreted away in corners, painted a detailed picture of a network built on fear, deception, and complicity. Each discovery strengthened her strategy, transforming righteous anger into tactical action. What some might dismiss as chaos or coincidence was to Agnes evidence that the men she planned to confront were not merely cruel but deliberate architects of terror. Every scrap of paper, every hidden implement, every testimony became a piece of a puzzle she would solve with precision. She cataloged it, memorized it, and folded it into her plan, ensuring that when the time came, no element would be left to chance. The evidence was damning, irrefutable, and a direct reflection of the system she had vowed to dismantle. In her hands, knowledge became power, and power became inevitability. Each revelation brought clarity, sharpened purpose, and a chilling understanding. The overseers had created a perfect web of control, but Agnes had already learned how to unravel it. What followed would be swift, precise, and unavoidable, and history would bear witness to her methodical and relentless pursuit of justice. Now, you have to understand, the night Agnes acted, the plantation erupted into chaos. Her movements were deliberate, precise, almost invisible, yet every strike resonated with the weight of justice, long delayed. Men who had once seemed invincible fell beneath her hand, their authority dismantled with surgical efficiency. The air was thick with the scent of blood, sweat, and fear, carrying the echoes of their cries through the cotton fields. Guards shouted, dogs barked, and the plantation's heartbeat became erratic, but Agnes moved with a fluidity that made her appear untouchable. Each step was calculated, every decision measured to ensure maximum effect and minimal risk of exposure. The pursuit was frantic, disorienting, and terrifying, yet it unfolded exactly as she had planned. Shadows became allies, darkness a shield, and every narrow escape was anticipated. Even as alarms rang and chaos erupted around her, she remained composed, navigating the labyrinthine layout of the plantation with the skill of someone who had memorized every corridor, every path, every hidden exit. In the midst of panic and fear, Agnes's courage and preparation transformed her into an unstoppable force. Every heartbeat, every whispered breath, every silent footfall contributed to a symphony of precise, inevitable justice that left the oppressors bewildered, powerless, and exposed. By the time she emerged from the immediate danger, the plantation had already begun to feel the tremors of what Agnes had unleashed, a reckoning long overdue, executed with terrifying brilliance. Let's be real. Even after Agnes emerged from the shadows, carrying the weight of her vengeance and the evidence of decades of cruelty, she faced disbelief. Those who should have recognized her courage dismissed her as mad, reckless, or deluded. Authorities feigned surprise, witnesses whispered doubts, and society struggled to reconcile her audacity with the image of obedience they had always enforced. Yet despite this outward resistance, Agnes had already achieved a victory far greater than public acknowledgement. She had shattered the illusion of control the overseers maintained for so long. Every lie, every facade, every carefully constructed narrative was exposed as fragile in the face of deliberate, intelligent rebellion. Though the world was slow to understand, the ripple effect of her actions spread silently but inexorably. Fear began to unsettle the once complacent, whispers of revolt circulated among the oppressed, and the first cracks in the seemingly unassailable system appeared. In this reversal, Agnes demonstrated that true power lies not in status or brute force, but in strategy, courage, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. The plantation might have tried to maintain its order, but it was already undone, one calculated, fearless act at a time. And for those paying attention, the lesson was unmistakable. When someone refuses to be broken, even the most entrenched tyranny can collapse, leaving a path for others to follow, tremulous but undeniable. Now, you have to understand, when the authorities finally descended on the Augusta plantation, the scene that greeted them was beyond comprehension. Hidden beneath layers of dust, shadow, and secrecy lay chambers that seemed almost designed to haunt the imagination. Tools of torment, chains, hooks, and blunt instruments were meticulously preserved as if awaiting the next act of cruelty, their placement deliberate, their purpose horrifyingly specific. The walls bore marks of suffering, scratches, etchings, and remnants of whispered pleas for mercy. Blood, long dried, had seeped into the wooden floorboards, a silent record of the lives stolen and spirits broken. Every corner, every nook, every locked door whispered testimony to decades of orchestrated fear. The overseer's private quarters revealed meticulous logs, secret ledgers, and correspondence that chronicled acts of oppression with bureaucratic precision, as if cruelty itself were an art form. Witnesses, those few who had survived, were brought forward, their altered movements, wary eyes, and haunted expressions providing living evidence that no ledger could fully capture. The investigators, accustomed to presenting polished narratives of law and order, found themselves confronted with a truth raw, messy, and undeniable. The plantation, carefully curated to appear orderly, now screamed its hidden reality, exposing not just individual acts of brutality, but a system so deeply entrenched that even the highest authorities had ignored it for decades. In those moments, the veneer of civility was shredded, and Augusta was forced to confront horrors its citizens had long preferred to deny, setting the stage for justice that would ripple far beyond the plantation's boundaries. Let's be real. The men who had ruled with impunity were finally revealed in their true forms. To the public, they had been dignified figures of society, merchants, overseers, and respected citizens, polished, polite, and seemingly virtuous. But the veil was gone. The raid, the testimonies, and the uncovered ledgers exposed layers of calculated cruelty and deception that no one could ignore. The smiles that had greeted neighbors and officials were now grotesque masks hiding monstrous intent. Each had committed acts so calculated, so deliberate, that the depth of their depravity stunned even seasoned observers. Some attempted to justify their actions, citing obedience, tradition, or economic necessity, but these excuses crumbled under the weight of evidence. The city's elite, forced to confront these revelations, were left grappling with a betrayal of trust so fundamental it shook social hierarchies. Villains who had believed themselves untouchable were stripped bare, their reputations shattered, their power eroded. Agnes's careful observation and meticulous strategy had ensured that no lie could endure, and no facade remain intact. In unmasking these men, she not only avenged herself and her fellow victims, but she demonstrated that appearances, no matter how polished, can never conceal truth from those determined to see it. The terror they once wielded so effectively now served only as testimony against them, a chilling reminder that calculated cruelty, when met with courage and precision, can be brought to light and held accountable for all to witness. I want you to picture this. Augusta was only a node in a far larger, meticulously maintained network of oppression. Letters and correspondences revealed connections to other plantations, financiers, and officials who profited from the same system of terror, stretching far beyond what anyone had imagined. Cruelty, it seemed, was not merely local. It was orchestrated, methodical, and deeply institutionalized, with complicit networks enabling the enslavement of countless lives. The evidence traced transactions, coordinated movements of enslaved people, and systematic methods of concealment designed to shield the powerful from scrutiny. Each revelation expanded the scope of Agnes's audacious acts. She had struck at the heart of a far-reaching machine that few dared to confront. The scale of complicity was staggering. It was a conspiracy woven into the very fabric of society, spanning miles and jurisdictions. Yet Agnes's meticulous planning had anticipated the breadth of the network, ensuring her actions could unravel it methodically, exposing every hidden ally and every silent enabler. The system, vast and seemingly invincible, was vulnerable precisely because it relied on secrecy and compliance. Agnes's courage, intelligence, and relentless pursuit of justice demonstrated that even the most entrenched oppression could be challenged, and that a single determined individual could ignite a reckoning that reverberated far beyond their immediate surroundings. In dismantling Augusta's oppressive web, she illuminated a terrifying truth. Injustice thrives in shadows, but precision, strategy, and courage can expose it to daylight, no matter how vast its reach. Now you have to understand, society itself had been complicit in the perpetuation of cruelty. Families, officials, and citizens preferred the comfort of ignorance, choosing denial over confrontation, turning blind eyes to the suffering that unfolded daily. Newspapers reported sanitized accounts of plantation life, describing order, productivity, and obedience while leaving out the screams, the scars, and the hidden deaths. Clerics offered prayers for the enslaved without acknowledging their oppression. Merchants profited from their labor while presenting a facade of civility. Silence was currency, and complicity was a social imperative. Agnes knew that confronting tyranny meant confronting not just the men who wielded whips, but the system that allowed them to act without accountability. Each act of silence, each refusal to question, reinforced the structures of oppression. And yet, through her precision and courage, she exposed cracks in that silence, forcing acknowledgement even from those who would rather look away. The conspiracy of quiet, once an impenetrable shield for cruelty, began to crumble under the weight of evidence, strategy, and retribution. Agnes demonstrated that injustice does not endure when faced with unflinching courage, even when society colludes to conceal it. By shining a light on complicity, she revealed a fundamental truth. Oppression relies not only on the actions of tyrants, but on the willing silence of bystanders, and breaking that silence is the first step toward justice. I want you to picture this. The overseers and their accomplices faced consequences both immediate and long-lasting, though none came without complexity. Some were captured, imprisoned, and stripped of the wealth and status they had wielded to oppress others, their once polished reputations now in ruins. The look of disbelief on their faces, the same men who had laughed in drawing rooms, who had commanded fields with unyielding authority, was almost palpable, as if reality itself had finally caught up to them. Others, too clever or too cautious, fled into obscurity, haunted by the knowledge that a single woman had orchestrated their undoing with precision and intelligence they had never anticipated. Agnes herself vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only stories whispered in fear and awe, her legend growing with each retelling. Those who had endured her oppressor's cruelty, the altered victims Agnes had observed, began to reclaim fragments of their lives. Some walked with renewed purpose, carrying forward the lessons of resilience and courage she had instilled. Others quietly nurtured small victories of dignity in places where fear once dominated. For the complicit, justice was unrelenting, creeping into their lives through shame, exposure, and social isolation. For the oppressed, it was liberation, fragile yet undeniable. Agnes ensured that her actions reverberated beyond a single plantation, sending shockwaves through the network of complicity, signaling that tyranny, even when deeply entrenched, was vulnerable to courage, strategy, and resolve. In every outcome, she left a mark. The oppressors confronted the weight of accountability. The complicit were reminded of their complicity, and the victims glimpsed a path toward restored dignity. The balance had shifted, not only through vengeance, but through meticulous planning, foresight, and the unyielding belief that even the most entrenched systems could fall when met with relentless courage. Let's be real. The legacy of Agnes of Augusta is not confined to history books or whispered folklore. It resonates as a living testament to courage, intelligence, and resilience. She transformed personal suffering into calculated justice, demonstrating that oppression, no matter how systematic or overwhelming, can be challenged by a combination of strategy, knowledge, and unflinching determination. Her story serves as a stark reminder that tyranny thrives in silence, and that complacency among bystanders allows cruelty to persist unchecked. Every chain she shattered, every act of defiance she executed, became part of a broader moral lesson. Justice often requires not only courage, but foresight, patience, and precision. Generations that came after her would find inspiration in her actions, understanding that even a single individual can shift the balance of power and restore dignity to the oppressed. Yet, the story is also a warning. Systems of cruelty are resilient, and the line between complicity and survival is often blurred, requiring vigilance and moral clarity. Agnes's legacy is not merely in the vengeance she wrought, but in the example she set, showing that intellect and courage, combined with an unyielding sense of justice, can leave indelible marks on society. The earth she walked, the paths she charted, and the lives she touched continue to echo through history, teaching that oppression can be dismantled, lies can be exposed, and silence can be shattered. Her life compels us to ask, when confronted with injustice, do we act? Or do we remain passive observers? The moral she leaves behind is clear. Courage, planning, and action can transform suffering into a force that changes history itself. Now you have to understand, could something like this happen today? Would we recognize it before it was too late? The echoes of Augusta remind us that injustice often hides in plain sight, cloaked by routine, obedience, or societal indifference. Silence and complacency give power to those who would exploit others, and yet history also shows that courage, intelligence, and resolve can shatter even the most entrenched systems of cruelty. Agnes of Augusta exemplifies this. A single person, observing, learning, and planning meticulously, can confront tyranny with precision and effect irreversible change. Comment, subscribe, and share your thoughts, because these are not mere stories of the past. They are warnings, lessons, and inspirations for our own time. Imagine standing in the shadows, sensing danger, feeling the weight of responsibility, and yet choosing to act. Her story challenges each of us to consider what we would do in the face of injustice, when silence and fear are the default. And next time, we will uncover another story hidden in shadow, a tale so dark, so true, and so twisted that it will force you to confront the fragile line between power and morality. Stay alert, because the echoes of truth never die. They wait patiently for those courageous enough to listen, ready to reveal secrets long buried, injustices long ignored, and heroes who defied impossible odds. The question remains, are you brave enough to follow where the shadows lead, to witness the full spectrum of human courage, cruelty, and cunning? The stories that lie ahead will test your perception, your empathy, and your resolve, just as Agnes's story has. The echoes are calling. You can either hear them or continue to let the world's injustices pass unnoticed.